20 Questions With is sponsored by Made in Britain. The Made in Britain trademark makes it easy to identify amazing products being manufactured in the UK right now. Promoting more than 2,000 manufacturers, it's an internationally recognised trademark of trust for British made goods, showcasing quality, provenance, and craftsmanship. Discover the home for British manufacturing and visit madeinbritain.org. Tim Wigmore, fantastic to see you. You are, of course, a sports writer at the Telegraph with a focus on cricket. And the reason I'm interviewing you today is because you have this great tome, this giant book called Test Cricket, A History. It's a fantastic read from what I've been able to read so far. Really enjoyable for someone like me who loves cricket, but maybe of interest as well to people who just want to dip their toes into the sport. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And I suppose that the book was well, it was 5 years to from conception to it coming out. So it's been kind of amazing to have it out, and yeah, people have been really nice about it so far, which has been great.
One of the things that struck me is the sheer number of world famous names in cricket that you were able to speak to in the book, and it made me incredibly jealous.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I was able to talk to a huge number, probably 40 or 50 guys. I was trying to pick my sort of team of people I talked to, but no, I've talked to people like Sachin Tendulkar, Michael Holding, Kevin Peterson, Ian Chappell, Murali, Dale Steyn, many of the absolute all-time greats. And I guess I kind of found that, yeah, a lot of them actually were really sort of when I talked about the project with their agents or with them directly, they were really kind of excited. But they were very. I think they have a real sense that they're part of this bigger story than them. Like Test cricket is a bigger story than them, and in that sense, they were happy to contribute. And it's sort of like the more people you talk to, the more that again kind of opens up doors, and it's quite addictive. Then you get another confirming, and yeah, it was very exciting. And actually, I think it was really important because I wanted to. Yeah, originally when doing the project, I thought it would mainly be looking at archives, looking at old footage, reading old books, which I did a huge amount of anyway. But actually, yeah, to get the immediacy and the kind of perspectives of people through interviews was so important. And also there was an interesting strand where because the literature is historically pretty Anglo-Australian, it's almost by England and Australia. So actually there were still quite a lot of gaps that I needed to actually talk to people directly about. Actually Zimbabwe, Andy Flower would probably be the biggest where like I just couldn't have really written about Zimbabwe with nearly the same level of authority that told Randy Flowers. He was Zimbabwe's greatest ever player. He becomes number one in the world when playing for the ninth best team in the world, which is really an unprecedented feat. He also, of course, he then wears a black armband to protest against Robert Mugabe in the state of democracy and the death of democracy in Zimbabwe. So an incredible figure on a number of different levels.
And went on to become the England cricket coach and is the only man to coach England to an away Ashes series victory since what, 86, 87.
Yeah, and you could actually say you could even argue the only kind of modern coach to do that because the idea of a coach kind of comes in the late 80s, really. Australia pioneered it with Bobby Simpson. So you could just about say he's the only England coach leading to away Ashes victory. And yeah, and Andy Farrow is an amazing figure actually because he's probably one of the very, very, well, maybe the only figure in the book actually in the whole story of Test cricket who is really important in the stories of two different, well, actually, no, it's not true. A few, obviously, people actually literally play for different countries, but he's unusual in the amount to which he's important in the stories of two different countries.
So you've spoken to a lot of people, but you've read a huge amount. I mean,
Yeah, read over 300 books. Yeah,
look at the bibliography. It's remarkable that this seems to me to be a real labor of love and a sort of deep interest. It's a deep dive, isn't it, into so many different facets of the game. What are the things that contribute, that come together to make Test cricket such a special game, and in my view, the greatest game on earth, the greatest game that we human beings have ever invented. So look, let's start 20 questions and we'll go a bit quicker fire than we have been so far. We'll rattle through, but lots and lots to cover. My first question to you, Tim, is can you synthesize why you love Test cricket?
I think it's the range of challenges, the kind of both the physical, the mental, the range of conditions you have to face. And there's something also about a series of 3 or even 5 matches we've seen this summer that really just takes you to kind of amazing places, really, and you kind of leave it all on the table. And I suppose looking throughout history, there's been quite a lot of occasions when Test cricket has had this much broader resonance beyond the field. It's been really important in nationhood, in shedding light on class, race, empire. And so actually this very silly, strange game really quite often has had a much broader importance beyond the field of play. And bringing out those stories was a real joy in the kind of process.
Your book, Test Cricket: A History, was published in April of this year. We're now in mid-August, and we have just witnessed one of the greatest Test series of all time, I would suggest, between England and India. I can't remember being as disappointed by the result of a series as I was when England managed to lose the final Test at the Oval by, I think, 6 runs, and thereby draw the series rather than win it 3-1. The fineness of margins. And of course, we know from the World Cup win in 2019, I was there
Yeah,
with my dad when, what was the name of the New Zealand commentator who talked about the barest of margins?
Ian Smith.
Ian Smith, the great Ian Smith, the barest of margins by which England had won that game. So that in itself, that the fact that up until the last ball or two of that series, England were open to a 3-1 victory or a
Yeah,
2-1
yeah.
victory if it had been a tie, and it ended up at 2-all. That says so much about, I think, Test cricket. But as well as being bitterly disappointed, I was enthralled by what this series had done for Test cricket, and maybe the fact that it had ended all square could be a good thing for the game. So, as you say in the book, questions about Test cricket and whether it is under sort of existential threat, they are not new. I think you quoted a TV exec from the 1970s, the late
I
1970s.
also, I mean, the first reference I could find to the game's not as good as it used to be. The players all play for money, not the badge on the shirt, was 1884. So there is a sense that this thing has always been getting worse. People love worrying about the future of it.
And I suppose that is bound up in the fact that it is, well, these days it's 5 days test matches. Many decades ago, we had timeless tests, didn't we? Where
3 day, and we had 3 day tests normally in England.
and then we had timeless tests, didn't we?
So normally in England it would be 3 days, the first four, and then it would be timeless at the end if it was all drawn. And Australia, every test would be timeless. So you had this weird inconsistency throughout. But also when people say it's always been 5 days, at least it's like that hasn't been true at all.
And so it's not new, this feeling that Test cricket is under threat. Where do you think we are now with it?
Well, no, I mean, so looking at the history, you do realize, even the gold, so the so-called golden age, which is basically before World War One, people were very worried there, not enough people going. You actually look at the 1981 Ashes, both of them's Ashes. There's you look on YouTube, there's a lot of empty seats. So look at the history is very useful in that sense. It gives you a perspective that these worries have really been almost always there. I think Test cricket is so kind of having done all that research, I'm more optimistic now purely because actually the landscape's always been uncertain, right? Um, where are we now? I think it's very clear we need the money. England India was probably always going to be a really good series. I don't think that changes much for Test cricket because the litmus test of Test cricket is not whether three nations can produce great series, Australia, England, and India. It's the Test game more broadly. So what you really need to do, you need to share the money around more broadly. You need to make I think the World Test Championship is really important, and you need to kind of pump that up more because we've had actually two of the three winners, South Africa and New Zealand, have been from outside the big three, which is great for Test cricket. So you need to make, but the point system is so confusing. So you need to simplify all these things, and you need to have windows when you just have Test cricket. And actually, I think, in my view, and I'm still going to say this after a great 5 test summer of 5 days each, I think there should be serious exploration of 4 day tests, whether that can, maybe be the stand in the World Test Championship. Because actually, when South Africa played New Zealand, I think that would be much better for Test cricket if that was 3 tests of 4 days each than two of 5 days each.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on that.
I thought you would, yeah. But I think we just have to remember that this is from an England's point of view, Test cricket is great, but I'm sort of looking more holistically around the world.
One of the reasons one thinks today, without knowledge of the history which you describe and the concerns for Test cricket that date back so far into the 19th century, as you say, is attention span. And it seems to me that, and this is just my feeling, that we have shorter attention spans now with the advent of social media and clips and clickbait online and all of this stuff than we used to, and that perhaps fewer books are being read, and there's a much greater sort of thirst for immediacy Do you think that that puts Test cricket under greater strain combined with the advent of the T20 game? And you wrote an award-winning book, of course, about T20s.
Well, look, I just think we've had record crowds for two consecutive series. Really, we've had England v India and Australia v India have record crowds, and they've both been 5 match series, and they both also showed there is this sort of it's like a box set quality to Test cricket where in a series like this where the drama keeps on going, and of course, if unlike me, you have a real job, you don't get to watch every ball, but you are still aware of these storylines. There is a sense, really, which Test cricket has always existed as escapism from the outside world, and that's actually part of its appeal, right? So I don't think attention spans mean the end of Test cricket. No, I think yeah, I think T20 in many ways and 50 over cricket has made the spectacle more exciting than ever. I think the actual quality of Test cricket, well, I think the sort of game we see has rarely been more exciting. I'm not sure it's as at its absolute peak in terms of quality, but it's a very very exciting game that we see. So I don't see why the forms can't coexist, but it needs better administration, and it needs at a minimum you need 2 or 3 months a year, which is actually not a huge amount of calendar when you just have Test cricket, because then you go and see and the players, there's a minimum sort of salary that the ICC instigates for Test cricket, which means if you go to see West Indies, all the best players will be available, and South Africa and so on. And then you're kind of keeping Test cricket as this sort of gold standard. But I think also in a way, every year that Test cricket has survived makes its future survival more likely because it's adding to the history and the legacy and so on. And that does resonate with players as well. It's like, if you're inventing a tennis championship now, you probably wouldn't say, oh, they should play in all whites as they do at Wimbledon. But of course, that is actually part of its attraction. So I am, yeah, I think I am maybe more optimistic than you, to be honest. I remember we've gone from 2 nations to 12, and I think also an underrated thing in the history of Test cricket, which I've really, which I've learned and I talk about, is the myth that it's this sort of never-changing game. In fact, one of the keys to its survival is how much it has adapted over time. So, we've had tests between 3 days and timeless. We've had introduction of helmets. A number of teams has gone from 2 to 12 day-night matches. The World Test Championship now. So all these innovations have been important. Yeah, I think there's plenty there. It needs better administration, and I suppose the history of Test cricket is of terrible administration, unfortunately.
You look at Basball, which of course you talk about in the book, and this is for those on the outside who might be just experimenting with the idea of cricket. Basball is named after England's coach at the moment, Baz McCullum, Brendan McCullum, who is a fantastic player for New Zealand himself. And he has teamed up with Ben Stokes, England's iconic captain, and also Rob Key behind the scenes. And they've come up with this brand of cricket that has meant that over a period of time, they've scored more quickly than any team in history.
Yeah.
And it is remarkable. And Ben Stokes, it seems part of what he's been up to is to spread the love of Test cricket and keep it alive. And it just makes it such a spectacle, doesn't it? But as an England fan, it can sometimes be infuriating because what you perhaps want more than anything is for your side to win. And there's a feeling that had they moderated it a little bit earlier than perhaps they did, they could have been even more successful than they have.
Yeah, but I think we have to remember that England won one Test in 17 before the start of the Basel regime. And the point of, if it's taking England from 8 to number 3 or 4, that's a really good strategy. It doesn't mean it clearly hasn't taken them to number 1 in the world, and perhaps it won't. But yeah, it has basically worked very well. It's true that England have now gone 7 series against Australia or India without beating them. So England are, they're not quite an elite side. And I suppose this is when you look at the history of transformations in Test cricket. So the previous one in terms of style was the Steve Waugh Australia team, and they instigated a similar change in run rates, but the difference was they were actually, they were winning everything in a way that this England team are not. So this England team are on a kind of, are they revolutionary? It's like, well, yes, they are in their intent. They're not quite in their execution. So they're half of a revolutionary team, if you like.
You spoke a moment ago, Tim, about players' awareness of the history of the game. And something that you wouldn't have if you didn't have Test cricket, really, are the statistics and the sort of great glory of delving into stats, wondering where someone is in the all-time list, wondering whether Joe Root will overtake Sachin Tendulkar as the highest scoring Test batsman of all time. the statisticians that we have on the BBC's Test Match special and on Sky Sports Cricket and so forth. And one senses that players, some put greater value on stats perhaps than others. I'm not sure how much stats really worry Ben Stokes. He's a sort of man for the big moment, perhaps. But as a fan, knowing where a player, a bowler or a batsman or a batter in the women's game, where they fit in is really part of the joy of it, isn't it? And if we only had T20s where centuries are few and far between, 5 wicket hauls are few and far between, you just wouldn't have that, would you?
Yeah, no, I do think there's a real sense that there is this kind of fascination. It's also, of course, what elevates achievements. So, 2018-19, India become the first ever Asian team to win in Australia, and that's a kind of a great achievement in of that own series. But what really, really elevates is the fact that no one has done that before, and so there is that sense, and we see this actually every time England goes to Australia. It's how rarely they win in Australia that makes it such a big deal and gives it this extra layer, right? So I think that is really important now, and so we see these, a test match is kind of never just a test match. It's also a fight against history, a fight to preserve history as well. So when West Indies have this long unbeaten run, 1980 to 1995, there's a sense that they're protecting this thing as well. So that is a really important part of Test cricket, and it does add a lot of narratives to it. And also, often it puts a target on the team's back as well, which also creates this, great drama.
And as a viewer or a listener, because it is played over 5 days or can be played over 5 days, you are so much more aware of not just the battle, the competition, but the contest between the two teams, but also matchups between players and also the individual successes of a particular player. How many runs is Shubman Gill going to score over the course of the series against England? Is he going to beat Don Bradman's achievement and so forth? Is Joe Root this winter going to be able to score his first Test 100 in Australia in the Ashes Down Under? These sorts of things, certainly for me and I imagine for many other fans as well, are part of what grips us.
Absolutely, yeah. So that there is a sense that each match is part of this broader story and this kind of epic, and you don't know where it's going to go. And this history, yeah, it can be a kind of a source of torment as well. Where one example, Alan Border, great Australian player, and is obsessed with beating West Indies. And they're about to beat West Indies in a series in 1993. He's playing with this cricket ball. He's playing with sort of this stress ball, bouncing around in the change room, very very nervous. In the end, Australia lose by 1 run to go 1-1 in the series. They then get hammered in the next test, lose 2-1. Border never beats Australia. He never beats West Indies. Australia then beat West Indies in the series after he's retired. But it's like, yeah, and he was sort of fighting against his dream the whole time. And of course, it's the cruelty, and actually you need it, unfortunately, sometimes not to go in the hero's way to make those moments even more amazing when they do happen.
And Alan Border, of course, was a man who revivified, regenerated Australian cricket, wasn't he? I mean, I think, was the captain when England won in Australia in 86, 87. So
That's
that
right. Yeah.
presumably had been a big blow to him. But he was also the captain in 1989, a six-test series, I think, when Australia beat us 4-0. That was the first series I really engaged with as a child. It was the second test I ever went to at Lords and saw Steve Waugh score 100. I'd seen Gordon Greenidge score 100 at Lords in 1988 as an 8-year-old. But for me, Adam Border was this sort of icon of Australian might. And yet there he was, not quite able to beat the West Indies in a series. Something else you bring up in the book is not just individual achievements or indeed team achievements, but partnerships. So the highest opening partnerships in Test history. And that's fascinating, isn't it? How particular individuals can team up with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the greatest partnership is between Jack Hobbs and Herbert Sutcliffe for England. The opening partnership that averages 87 together, which is just incredible. This is in the sort of interwar period. But yeah, you see again, one of the great joys, actually, the book was talking with Rahul Dravid about his incredible partnership with Vivius Laxman against Australia 2001 in Kolkata. So Australia at the time were the best Test team in the world, maybe one of the absolute best ever. And India are dead and buried, and Laxman and Dravid, they bat all day together in absolute sweltering heat and turn the match around. And Dravid talks about how kind of however tired he was during that day, and they would be getting, using towels to cool them down in the breaks. They ended the day on a drip to rehydrate, but he would constantly tell himself, if I'm this tired, think how tired the others will be. And that kind of level of willpower and resilience is amazing. And yeah, and in fact, these two, Laxman and Dravid, it was so great because they played together a lot as kids and they knew each other really, really well. And they knew how to get the best out of each other. So to kind of come together and do that an all-time thing. And again, it needed both of them to do that. And so that's great. He had kind of two men together standing up against this superpower of a team and kind of bring them to dust.
Hobbs managed that with Sutcliffe, but he's also on the table of top opening partnerships with Rhodes as well, Wilfred Rhodes, which shows how long a career can be. 20 years in his case, a couple of decades. And what you've just said there, Tim, calls to mind a word that I've read more than once in your book, which is brutal. And
Yeah.
it's the sort of brutality, physically and mentally, of Test cricket that just simply isn't replicated in the shorter forms of the game, which is part of what makes it so alluring to people watching and listening.
No, I think that's right. I think it is such a because it just gets everything out of you. You have to remember you have to succeed in conditions kind of ranging from North England to Perth when the ball is leaping up to Chennai when it's turning around corners. So there's a sheer range of conditions also, that makes it so brutal. And the sense that if you have one weakness, if you're batsman, you have one ball that you can't play against, that can basically ruin your career almost. And so, yeah, you do see the absolute exhaustion it brings players to, and the sense that there is no escape. I think there's also something so clinical and cold about how if you go and play football and you're a left back and you don't have a great game, you can kind of say, it was okay. But if you get out for naught as a batsman or as a bowler, you're hit for 100 runs. That is just there. And the fact that people who don't even understand the game can say, "Oh, you got naught. That's not very good," and kind of that's all there. Whatever you've done before, and I suppose the fact that every day, yeah, you very much you're all out there. You start from nothing, and you have the possibility of actually if me or you went out, we'd get out for a golden duck, and yet some of the best players ever can get golden ducks as well. So it's odd in that sense as well.
And as you say, I mean, when you read a match report from football or rugby, you can see players being rated by a football correspondent or a rugby correspondent, or sometimes by the fans themselves, and it might be an aggregate score. But in cricket, it is just what you scored. And yet, the stats themselves don't always tell the stories. Joe Root might be given not out when he's on three, and the other side refer that to the third umpire, and it shows that the ball was just grazing the stump and therefore is umpire's call, and therefore the on-field decision stands and he remains not out. Whereas if the umpire had given him out, because it's umpire's call, he would indeed have been out. And then he goes on to make 100. The same could happen the other way around. Someone could be given out for three, marginal decision, and then all you get in black and white the next morning is three instead of 100. And so stats are fascinating, but they don't always tell the whole story.
No, exactly. And actually, some of the kind of most famous innings. I mean, when Jack Leach is batting with Ben Stokes at Headingley, Jack Leach gets one not out, but they put on 70 odd and they can win that test by one wicket. And so it's the kind of most valuable one not out in the history of the game. And so, yeah, you do have this element, of course, and of course the other element is that the worth of runs is not constant; it changes over time. You get eras which are much harder for batting and much easier for batting, and so actually, when you just say someone's average is X, it really only tells you a limited part of their story. Of course, it's important, but actually, you need to understand that in context.
Something that people who don't love Test cricket might be surprised at, but maybe by talking about it will emphasize just how special it is to us. And those who love Test cricket will know exactly what we're talking about here. Is I know where I was when Jack Leach and Ben Stokes were building that partnership. I was walking down sort of stony, wooded area down to a Spanish beach with friends. And I think Broad was out and Archer was out. I can't remember quite how they got out. One of them might have got out hooking. And it was down to the impossible. It was Leach and Stokes. And Stokes, of course, had built his innings painstakingly slowly to start with and then started to go through the gears. And I found myself on this Spanish beach listening to Test Match Special. And it was just one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And I was jumping up and down on a beach in a country that knows very, very little and plays very little cricket. And so you'd have Spaniards wondering what this English chap was doing. And that is, to me, that sort of sums up the power of the game.
Yeah, that's right. I think, wherever you are, you feel this connection to this event. and actually you'll have and a lot of people I think as well they use test matches as a kind of marker in their life and all the other things changes and they will think oh the Lord's test that year the Lord's test that year and so on and yeah it has this kind of this kind of background this backdrop to much yeah to the rest of people's lives which is very very special.
It can pick you up as well. I mean, I've thought recently, as a 45-year-old man, perhaps I care too much about it. Perhaps I listen or watch to too much of it. And there was a point in the India series where I actively tried to switch off. England, I think, were having a dip at that point, and I tried to step back. And then you tune back in, and something's happened, and the momentum has shifted, and suddenly you're grabbed by it again. And a lot of people will dip in and out, and that's part of I think that what's so fantastic about a game that can last 5 days, and also that a game that lasts 5 days can be meandering. There can be sort of almost boring moments. It can look as though it's going to end in a draw. I remember an England Sri Lanka game that seemed in England that was almost certain to end in a draw, and then on the last evening, England got a cluster of wickets and won the game. But the momentum shifts are so thrilling. I think back to that Oval Test just the other day when India won, as we've been discussing. That I counted, there must have been something like 10 or 11 momentum shifts between England and India in that one game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole the kind of drama of it is it oscillates the whole time, and the momentum. I'm actually big. I'm very skeptical of momentum. I think actually a lot of Test series people say so and so has momentum, and the other team wins the next game and stuff. So yeah, I'm quite skeptical of it as a concept, but it is true that yeah the game can shift really really quickly, and that's
Well,
part of the magic. Yeah.
if I'm right that there were these 10 or 11 momentum shifts, that makes your point in a way, doesn't it? Because the one team having the momentum doesn't mean that the next team isn't going to have the momentum 20 minutes later.
Yeah, yeah,
But maybe momentum isn't the right word, or there's another word for it. But England were seemed to be on top one moment, and India seemed to be
absolutely.
on top
Yeah.
another moment, and that is just such good fun. By the way, in all of this, we shouldn't say that there isn't a room for limited overs cricket. I said earlier that I was at the World Cup final in 2019 with my dad. It's the first time in my life I think I was physically shaking, during that super over or the build up to it, and sort of almost in tears of ecstasy, joy, horror that England might still lose, whatever it was. It really got me physically, and that was a 1 day game, and we can't forget that. By the way, part of what made that so great was the history, because there is a history of 1 day international cricket as well. England had never won a 50 over World Cup, and here we were
Absolutely.
on the
Yeah.
brink. So, what that's all I'm saying is that there are great stories, great achievements, great thrills in the 1 day game, and I suppose also to perhaps to a lesser extent in the T20 game.
Yeah, no, there are absolutely. Yeah, I like all forms of cricket. And I think, yeah, as you said, I've written a book on T20 cricket and I've written a book on Test cricket. So there's always a kind of cultural tendency to put you on one side, to kind of put you on camp. I don't think you need to do that, but I think this book really has given me just a deeper appreciation of Test cricket and it's, yeah, the subtleties, but also the wider importance, the way it's evolved. There is something very very special to the game, and I hope to kind of to bring that across. And I think the players actually, a lot of players do really recognise that.
I suppose one of the reasons that the 2-all scoreline in the England India series felt important was because I think I don't know whether it's critical, but to use that word again, at least it's important that fans in India embrace the game of Test cricket because, of course, the IPL, the T20 league in India, has been so massive and the grounds have been so full that if Indian fans are not engaged in Test cricket, then given the power of Indian cricket these days, and that's there's been a shift in that direction during my lifetime, my following of the game, then that seems to me to be a potential problem for Test cricket. So the fact that so many Indian supporters were likely to be delighted by that final test at the Oval, to me seemed like a good thing.
Yeah, but I mean, India were captivated by the series. Australia lost 3-1 over the winter as well. So India's support for Test cricket is pretty strong. It's you know, it's more than yeah, it's more than people think sometimes for sure. I think the most watched Test ever was the World Test Championship 2023 final India Australia. So yeah, I think that the yeah for me the concern is not really India and Australia and England. It's everyone below because you need more than three strong countries.
But so then, can you answer a question? I don't know whether this has ever adequately been answered for me. Why? So I mentioned the full grounds at the IPL games. Why are test grounds not full? or at least not full all the time in India when cricket is such a massive thing there. I mean, I went to the Wankhede Stadium, England playing India for a test match in 2016. I went to 3 or 4 days of that, and there was a very healthy crowd. I don't think it was full. And if you look at video of other grounds in India in recent years, I think you'll find that there are lots of empty seats. Why is that?
I think it's a simple fact that Test cricket, by its nature, is played in the working week. The IPL is very much designed for people to go either weekends or after work. I think that's probably the biggest element. I mean, these games are often, yeah, you said it's not full. Might have 30,000 people. It's maybe it's not full, but still a lot of people. And I suppose historically, actually, a lot of grounds in England haven't actually in the last 15, 20 years has been such a culture of going, which is why you used to be able to actually walk up to grounds often, including 1981 Ashes as well. I suppose yeah, you could go back and say, why weren't the England grounds full in 1981? And I suppose yeah, actually you look at other countries as well, and crowds there are yeah often not particularly great. I guess the one thing I would say about India is that often the schedule is not announced until relatively late, and that is a very basic thing that actually, I think what Australia shows is that you always know when Australia's done very well, that you always know when all the tests are going to be played, as in there'll be a Boxing Day test in Melbourne, a New Year's test in Sydney, and now even the earlier tests, the Adelaide and Perth and Brisbane tests, they tend to have a kind of a block. So fans in advance will generally, from years out, they'll be like, oh, the test then is generally about December 15th in Adelaide, whatever. And so that makes it easier to just kind of book it out with your mates every year and say, we're going to go to this. I think that's what Test cricket, one of the things it could do better actually, is say, there is going to be a test at Mumbai or Christchurch, and it's going to be around this week every year. And sure, it might change a little bit, but you basically kind of know. I think and you create that sense of people don't just go for the cricket; they go to catch up with their mates and a social occasion, and you have that kind of firm in the canvas. I think that's something that yeah, administrators could do a little bit better.
We're going to come on to bowlers because we've been focusing so far on batting, but just one more thing on batting, and it involves bowlers, of course. Fascinating to me in your book, the reaction times, how you spell out in sort of with decimal points, the reaction
Yeah.
time that batsmen or batters have. We've been talking mostly about men so far, but of course the women's game seems to me to be growing. I'm not a huge fan of the 100, but it seems to have done fantastic things for the women's game. I've got a young daughter. I'm delighted she's growing up at a time when she will have, I hope, similar opportunities, ideally the same opportunities as my son to play cricket and to watch cricket. She's already been in the pavilion at Lord's. So the women's game is incredibly important, just as important as the men's game to me as a dad anyway. I can't pretend I watch as much women's cricket. But just to focus on these reaction times for a second, we're talking sort of split seconds, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. So between a ball being bowled at 90 miles an hour and it arriving at the batsman, they have about 0.45 seconds to react to that. But of course, for the final 0.15 seconds, it's actually too late to do anything. So basically, you have a quarter of a second, zero point 0.2 seconds really, to process all that information and work out what shot, whether you're going to go forward or back, or where you want to try and hit the ball. So it's amazing. So effectively, as I show, I talked about so much. You need to actually be able to anticipate, and actually the best batsman can anticipate even from how a bowler delivers the ball, whether it's likely to be a shorter ball or a fuller ball. They find these cues in the action, and when at the point at which the ball was released, again, it tends to be released slightly earlier if it's going to be a shorter ball. So they use all this information and kind of raw instincts to work out what's going to happen. So it's scientifically actually just hitting a ball is a at that speed is an absolute miracle, really.
And you make the point, of course, that the ball can move late. So it can move once it's hit the pitch. It can also swing late. And there's a part of the book dedicated to reverse swing, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah.
So when the ball is moving late and is moving at a time when it's too late for a batsman or a batter to adjust, what happens there? Like, what chance does a batter have of countering late movement?
Well, so this is why actually, so you two types of movement. You have swing, which moves in the air, and you have seam, which moves off the pitch. This is why seam, which is in a way probably less aesthetically pleasing, which is when it moves off the pitch, is more effective because basically when it's moving in that after it's off the pitch, you're within the kind of 0.15 seconds where it's too late for the batsman to adjust, which is why if the ball moves a little bit late off the seam, it's essentially impossible to play. Which is why, yeah, seam movement is so effective because the batsman just cannot adjust that shot at that point.
And yet they do. Or if they don't, they still survive. I mean, how does a batter survive when it's out of their control, as it were?
Well, they often don't survive. They often nick it, or they just avoid avoid nicking the ball, or they kind of before the ball is bowled, they kind of guess that it's going to move away, but they no they it's basically impossible. Which is why I talked with Ken Peterson about Mohammed Asif, who was bowling the what's called the wobble seam, where it would move all the way off the seam, and he said it's just almost impossible to play. Basically, it's a complete joke, and he's one of the greatest batsmen ever.
But so hang on, I want to delve just slightly deeper into this because Jimmy Anderson was famous for being able to bowl, I don't know, three or four outswingers or balls that might move off the seam outwards. Is that right?
Yeah, it would
I,
swing away. Yeah.
are we talking? So he would be swinging it rather. I mean, he could also
Well,
move.
no, he could seam it as well. Yeah.
Like you can intend to move it in one direction off the pitch as well as swing, can't you?
Well, seam it. It's true. Yeah. People's actions it tends to mean that they move. They tend to generate seam normally one or the other. We have this thing called the wobble seam, which is so deadly because it basically moves either way or doesn't move. So you have three options, which could so lethal. Yeah.
But Jimmy would move the ball away, three or four balls in a row, and then nip one back. That if you are a batsman, how do you how do you deal with that? I mean, you mentioned Mohammed Asif. How do you cope with that?
Well, it's incredibly difficult. I suppose one thing we're seeing now is batsmen are using their feet a little bit more. They're to bowlers who are not quite as quick. So you're not you're by moving forward, you take away a little bit of your reaction time. But actually, you're if you're moving towards the pitch of the ball, you actually give it less time to swing and seam. So that's one way of controlling that movement. For example, you can also you playing inside the line of the ball. So you're basically saying if it's going to move away, I'm not going to nick it, and if it's going to move in, I'm going to hit it with the middle of my bat. So there's millions of options, but it's not easy, that's for sure.
But we do hear of some teams struggling more than others with the moving ball. So if you think back to Stuart Broad's eight for whatever it was, he took 8 for 14 or something. He
Eight for
took
15.
8 for 15 in the Ashes at Trent Bridge when Jimmy Anderson was injured. I think it was felt that the Australians were struggling with the moving ball. And England's best chance of victory has been when they've been bowling on English pitches that assist movement off the pitch. And possibly with overhead conditions as well, so that it swings if there really is a link between the two. Whereas when England play abroad, it's tougher for them, and that the conditions might be more in favour of the home side. This is broadly true of all teams. They tend to play better, you would think, at home. It's more to their advantage. But why would it be that English batsmen are better able to deal with the moving ball than foreign batsmen typically? If,
Just because they have more experience of it. As
but
simple as
if
that, I think.
but if it's impossible, if it's impossible to
Well, no, but we talked about wet methods, such as playing inside the line, where you can make your misjudgment. I think the key is you make your misjudgments less lethal because by playing inside the line of the ball, it means actually you're protecting your wicket, and then if it moves away, you're not going to nick it. Rather than if you follow the ball, you're more likely to nick it. So there's things like that. You playing with softer hands, for example, means a nick is less likely to edge to the slips. And the feet that we talked about. So there's lots of things you can do to make it less likely to get you out, but it's still very difficult.
the level of detail we've been going into is another indicator of what makes Test cricket so interesting.
Yeah, there's endless mile hole. You can go further and further. Absolutely.
Let's briefly touch on
Still,
bowling then.
yeah,
Let's touch on bowling a little bit more than we already have. So we often hear, don't we, that one of the great elements of Test cricket is fast bowling, extreme fast bowling, the thrill of it, the fear that batsmen might experience. I mean, in the book, Michael Holding talks about being able to intimidate batsmen without having bowled a ball. You could almost see the concern,
yeah.
or the fear in their eyes as they came to the wicket. So the power of pace, but also the joy, the intricacies, the mystery of spin. One of the things that made Shane Warne such a compelling player to watch, or Muralitharan as well, who you interview in the book, as you say. And then, of course, there's the medium pacers who can nip the ball this way, nip the ball that way, seem innocuous, but be devastating at times. And that all adds to the rich tapestry, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact you have so many different methods of bowling and often effective in different conditions. But yeah, I agree. I mean, fast bowling, you have that the kind of the sense of danger, the very human sense of danger, especially, when you didn't have helmets, but even now you still have it. But when you have a great fast bowler bowling 95 an hour at a batsman, often you need very personal duels, a famous one between Andon and Mike Atherton, which I talked to them both about for the book. And then you have obviously spin. You have people like Shane Warne, and Matar Muralitharan, who able to spin the ball and an incredible amount. Generate these kind of impossible angles. And again, as a batsman, you have such a broad range of challenges, and that's all part of So to be a great test player, a great test batsman, you need to find a way to overcome all these different bowls with all these different tricks. And often, of course, you have very compelling cricket when you have a great spinner at one end and you have a great fast bowler at the other, and it creates a kind of classic cocktail.
Before I ask you about your own experience of being a sports journalist, just give us a bit of an overview of the book from the point of view of the politics. You mentioned racism, you mentioned, I think, class, or if you didn't, class was a
Oh,
big thing.
I do mention absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and indeed today that there are question marks about how available cricket is to pupils at state schools in this country. Cricket sort of almost can be a lens through which to look at society and therefore also a lens through which to look at history.
Yeah, absolutely. You see this again and again, I suppose. A couple of the examples. So England used to have this distinction between professionals and amateurs. So you'd have amateurs who were basically kind of almost quasi aristocrats from very, very upper class backgrounds. And until 1952, they would have to be the captain of England. And as I show in the book, these amateurs were often just not worth their place in the team at all. And it was a big reason why England kept struggling in the Ashes away, because they'd pick these guys as captain who just weren't worth their place in the side, let alone as captain. West Indies until 1960 have white captains only. All the full-time captains are white, which again, that is hugely significant from a political level in West Indies, which is why people were campaigning for like CLR James, for example, who was campaigning for Caribbean independence, while he was also really campaigning for Frank Worrell to become the first black captain in West Indies, because he saw a link actually between the two. So that was really important. Of course, you then have the ban on apartheid South Africa in 1970. So you do see again and again cricket's broader importance from in politics. You also see it with kind of nation building in the case of India, Pakistan, and with Bangladesh. So you see actually having a Test cricket team is a sign of nationhood and a rival as well. So yeah, certainly much broader importance than just 11 men on the field from two teams.
So, what is it like for you, Tim, to be a cricket writer? Is it a great joy? Is it unbelievably hard work? Do you go on tour? Is cricket a vehicle for your creativity, for your skills as a writer? Just talk to us a little bit about that, and also maybe about the difference between writing articles and writing a sort of 500 odd page book such as this.
Yeah, the cricket. I mean, it's a great way of exploring. It's a kind of window onto the world. So you can explore all these topics through the kind of prism of cricket. And I suppose the book was an absolute joy. I mean, to be able to, I'm very lucky in my day job and what I do, but there's something really, really special about being able to take a step back, to do all these interviews, to go through the archives, and actually just to have the kind of time to kind of think in your mind. Often it's kind of when you're writing, you realize what you know, but also the things you don't know, and to kind of put it all together was really fun. And I suppose I very much tried to make it it's a narrative history, and it's designed to be read by non-specialists and specialists alike, and really bringing to life the players, the matches, the politics that have shaped the game over now 148 years. A remarkable existence, really.
So, you don't do match reports for the Telegraph. You sort of stand back a bit.
Yeah, I do and analysis pieces. So it's basically picking a theme or a moment or a duel or a player, and writing about that and trying to get a bit of kind of perspective on it as well, or sometimes just bringing to life the drama of it. And obviously there was so much drama in that England India series, and yeah, things to write about. But yeah, zooming in often on something and looking at why it was so important.
Will you typically write your pieces while you're at a game in the press box, or do you prefer to be at your desk at the Telegraph if you have one, or at home? Like, where are you best as a writer?
I do all my pieces when I'm at matches themselves. Yeah, it's not my choice, but actually it was exactly what I would choose to do, because you do get a lot there from the immediacy and the kind of wider buzz, and yeah, and kind of bring it to life. Obviously, you want to write something that people couldn't write watching at home. So actually, and you can see a lot, and you get all the color when you're there.
Do you absolutely love it?
Yeah, it's good. It's tiring, but it's good fun. Yeah.
Because you have a background in current affairs a bit, don't you? Were you not an assistant comment editor at the Telegraph many years ago?
Yeah, I was. You've done your research well.
Not many years ago, because you're not that old. You're young. You're certainly younger than me. You studied politics and history at Oxford,
Yeah.
and you contributed to the morning newsletter at the Telegraph.
Yeah, morning briefing. Yeah.
Does cricket and sport do they fulfill you as someone who has those broader interests as well?
I think you can write on kind of the whole world through the prism of sport. So yeah, I mean, I look at, obviously I've done things on, on gambling, on education, on kind of the idea I had the bubble burst of the Premier League. There's the amazing human interest stories. I talked to the doctor who treated Rishabh Pant after his car crash. There's actually such a range of stuff you can write on through the prism of sport. So it's very exciting, and also there's just masses and masses of stuff to write about. And I suppose to give you an understanding of countries as well. It's a brilliant. You talked about the rise of India earlier. Actually, cricket is a great way to understand that.
Are England going to win the Ashes?
No,
Are we going to get thrashed?
well, we lost 13-0 across the last three series. I think we'll do better than that, but I think it'll be I think, yeah, the Indian journalists who've covered both India's series in Australia and England all think England will lose, which is a decent bar. But no, I mean, if England's fast bowlers stay fit, they have a real chance. I think England will win a live test, which they haven't done since 2010-11. So I think they'll compete more. But I just think Australia still. I mean, the history of Test cricket is matched to one by who has the better bowling attack generally. And Australia, I know that we talk about their ages and stuff, but there's more questions I would say about the England bowling attack than Australia's. So yeah, I'd definitely say Australia are favourites.
If we make it, I said I'm certain I'm older than you, but if we make it through to our old age, sitting in an armchair, will Test cricket still be a thing?
Yes.
People can buy your book in online and maybe in bookshops still.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As I say, in all good bookshops and some bad ones as well.
Excellent. Tim Wigmore, thank you so much for answering my 20 plus questions.
Thanks, Matthew. That was a real treat. Yeah, very. I can tell your knowledge it shone through in your questioning.